4, 3, 2, 1. Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Fred says.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome back to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We are on episode 178. Last week we had a debate, and you're going to have to excuse my voice today. I have some weird sort of cold thing, and my voice is cracking all over the place. But last week we had a debate.
Second puberty. That's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it second puberty.
It's second puberty. No, thank you. No, thank you. But, last week we had an episode where we did a debate, and we really would like some feedback because neither one of us actually participated in the debate. We had a debate with two people we knew from online. And while, Hannah and I could say, hey, we're this part, we could do this differently, blah, 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 blah. We weren't involved in that debate. And I want to give both the teams, props, especially Mikey, because he was put up against an opponent who was very determined to make Trump look like not only the Geodis, but the most amazing Emperor Palpatine of all times. That was just like, this dude had a hard on for it. And maybe we'll see Dallas again. I don't know. He shows up in my feed, quite a bit. I have to curtail some of it. He's very polite in his comments. He's not like that Nathan dude that used to comment on my stuff. I don't even know what happened to that dude. But Nathan used to just lambaste everybody. But Dallas is at least respectful. He doesn't do the name calling thing, except for leftists. That's like his favorite word. Like if you go back and play bingo and put leftists in all 16 squares, I guarantee you that it will come out. You will fill every one of them twice over. That's how many times he says leftist. I almost titled the episode, "Are the leftists against Trump?" Just because it's just insane, the amount of times he says that word.
Or make it a drinking game and pass out in 20 minutes.
You could do that. So this week we thought we would go back to a more quick fire type news oriented format. We have a couple of science segments this week. We had to record a little bit early because my birthday is Monday. So as this is being released, I'm probably hungover somewhere in a ditch. I don't know. Probably not because I'm 36 this year. So I don't do anything very exciting. My birthday falls on Memorial Day this year, right? And my son's in the local parade, and my daughters can be involved in the local parade. So I have to get up early on my birthday, get all the kids over their parade stuff. Then I get to go back and sit on my porch. And then I was like, screw it. You know what? Because it takes forever for the traffic to clear out. And because a parade literally goes down my street, I can't leave my house till 10 o'clock that day. I was
you can sit on your porch and smoke legal marijuana.
I could. The kids might not know what's going on.
Oh my God. I would love to watch the people in your conservative neighborhood sit and watch you smoke big fat spliffs on your deck in just in full American flag regalia. You got to put an American shirt on.
Do a Kid Rock thing, right? I'll get the straw hat, the cowboy boots,
the whole thing. No, you got to dress up like Huck Finn with over short ripped jeans and suspenders and a white shirt and a straw hat, and just be or you could do something from what was it? Kill a Mockingbird. You just sit down there by the tree at the end of your drive and be like, "Is Boo Radley coming out to play today?" And just because what are they gonna do besides just hate you more? I'm sure your neighborhood is that's where the liberal is.
Well,
that leftist,
a little bit, yeah. Especially after my Hillary sign, yeah. If anybody
Oh,
remembers the Hillary sign, yeah, I'm sure they think that. Well, the funny thing is because the parade goes down my street, and technically there's a sidewalk that people can walk down, and on the opposite side of the sidewalk, I don't own that property, the city does, right? People will literally come in the morning and lay their blankets and chairs in front of my house. So if I don't get up at the butt crack of dawn, and I can't even sit there out front in my house, I feel like I can sit on my porch.
Yeah.
But then the problem is because all these people put their stuff out, then other people like to stand in my yard. Like they just stand in my yard. Like the other time I was sitting down there, like 2 years ago, I'm just sitting there and I'm sitting in front of the house, like in front of the public yard, right?
Yeah.
And I got people standing in my yard with their dogs and their kids, and I just want to be like, hey, I get you want to see the parade, but come on, man. I don't have sprinklers. I'm too poor for automated sprinklers.
No. One cheap Dollar General.
Yeah, and run the hose to it.
Nah, I don't know. I just if I lived in a neighborhood like that, like I would be like a pranky kind of guy. Like my neighborhood that I'm in right now, it's an older neighborhood, but it's really diverse. Like my neighbor that lives next to me, she's been here since 1955, and my other neighbors right next door, a Dominican and a Mexican marriage with tons of family, people all over. That next house over is an Asian family that I'm not particularly certain where they're from, but like their language and dialect is insanely deep. I was trying to understand and talk to them, just like to get to know them the other day, and I love finding out who people are and where they're from, and so and there's some awesome diversity in my neighborhood. So like in my neighborhood, I don't really have any issues where like I'd be like nah, but I do know that people don't go outside. Like I'm always out playing in the front yard with my kids, mostly because my backyard, I'm growing grass right now, so I can't really do much back there. But like just in the front yard playing with the dogs and the kids and, working on flowers and just doing stuff. Like my neighborhood's empty. There's nobody on the streets, nobody in the yards, nobody doing anything. And like people drive by and they're like, wow, there's people out in their yard. I don't understand. Like people don't do anything out front. Like I'm barely home as it is, and I'm still outside more than people that are in my neighborhood. I don't know. It's just I guess it's a change of what people do nowadays.
Exactly. And and it's kind of the same way. I don't yell at anybody. I just let them stand there. It's like whatever. If I watch the dog poop, I'll say something. But that's never actually happened. But I will sometimes in the middle of the summer when it's really hot because I don't have air. So sometimes I'll just sit on my porch, anyway, because if it's going to be hot anywhere, I might as well stay as close to the breeze as possible. And sometimes I'll sit on the porch and, like people bring their dogs and they won't see me because I'll just be, I have, my porch is kind of separated by the main door, right? And on one side, there's a table and chairs. On the other side, I have a couch and like a stools. And I'll be laying on the couch sometimes, or I'll be like lounging there on my phone, or I'll, have a book or something. And they won't notice. And they'll their dogs will stop and pee. And then I sit up.
And everybody jumps. Ah!
And they kind of look over, and I just stare at them. Just wait. If the dog pees, I don't care, right? But if the dog poops, you better pick it up, because if I have to step in it, we got a problem. Take care of your dog poop. It's pretty simple. If you need a bag, I got extra bags in my house. I mean, you can even come up to me and be like, "Hey, can I borrow a bag?" But
we have some people that let their dogs loose in the neighborhood, and that is an issue. I guess that would be a problem. That's really the only problem. There's a couple of people who can't keep their dogs in their house, and they'll run around the neighborhood and just kind of like goof. The old lady next to me is she is the caricature of the angry old person, and she literally, my new neighbor from new last year, she has a little dog. And she, the little dog is not the dog that's running around the yard all the time. Well, anyways, my neighbor, the old lady, gets up and she picks up the poop out of her yard and she throws it in my neighbor's yard. And so my neighbor, she came up to me and she's like, I don't, in her, thick Dominican accent, and she says, she's like, the old lady, she throws caca. She throws caca on my mailbox. It took me a few minutes to realize that caca is crap. And it was such a strange exchange. And I was like, she really actually did that? She's like, yeah, she picked it up and she threw it. And I watched her throw it in my yard, and she yelled and she told me to take care of my dog. And I was like, it's not my dog, lady. The whole, some people just take that protect the neighborhood or like no solicitors thing way too seriously. Like just chill out a little bit. Like I get it. Like someone pooped in your yard or something. Like every once in a while I'll have something where I got to scoop up something and I know it's not my dog's, but like if I'm stepping in it regularly, that would make me angry. But in the end, it's just like I'm too lazy to get that mad over that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So
our first episode was way too many years ago. We're old. See, I was going to say our first article tonight that we wanted to talk about was an article from The Guardian about how certain salaries of executives were frozen, and instead of giving them increases, they gave the increases to 500 of the employees. And this isn't like something that just happened recently. This is something that started, 5 years ago with a company called CareCentrix, right? And it's a healthcare company
or something.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? A healthcare company did this, of all things, right? And so what they did is, and this, I'll be honest, this is actually not a like some big new thing, that's happened. Our companies actually discussed a little bit of this. But what they do is they talked about how they've had a decline in revenue, a stallage of growth for their company, and how the board of directors decided to invest money back into the people to see if they could reduce their turnover numbers and increase the amount of team players that they had. Our company is going through a very similar thing. We actually are reanalyzing every employee, no matter who it is, top down, to say, are you a team player? Are you the ideal team member?
Are you motivated, even if you're not perfect? Like, are you motivated and are you doing above your ability? Like, and motivation, like Maslow always says, like all of those things are major factors.
Yep. And so like an ideal team player is humble, hungry, and smart. And not smart in the way of intelligent, but smart in being able to interact with others. So for example, if you and I had a conflict and I decided to throw the keys to your high-low across the room, I'm obviously not being very smart about how I communicate with you, right? So anyway, when we go back and look at it, turnover is one of the highest reasons people have for losing money. Corporations can't keep people. They got to hire and train, and it costs a fortune. Even if you have a miraculous training program, it does not matter. It still costs a fortune to do this.
That's one of the reasons why my company is we're getting out of my company, is that I made an investment on an apprentice for about 3 years, and my estimated investment on that for the company was over $100,000. And all the time and money that I could have been if I had, been left alone to work instead of training and teaching someone. And then, the fact that they were working on something and maybe making less than the quoted wages and time for some of these jobs. Like, I invested a ton of money in this and I had turnover on that gone. And so like, even with, the old school method of, hands-on training, that's money that's not guaranteed to stay in your company. What this company here was talking about, in some divisions, they were losing 30 to 40% of their teammates in a year. And so you're having to rehire 30 to 40% of the people to cover the workload, or you're, double, tripling the workload that people who are staying in the company are doing. Like, this is just an unhealthy situation. And the only way you can do it is to keep people in or to make the people that you have working for you more productive. Like, those are two things you got to have.
Well, and so for example, when our company's looking at it, we look at, and I've had to have this conversation. It's kind of amazing. All these people with degrees, who've been around a lot longer than me, some people just don't, they're not looking at it like this. But I say, think about, take your lowest paid worker in your warehouse. Are you able to meet their minimum needs? Does our health care coverage cost this stuff? Does, do we offer flexible time off? Are we willing to work with people that, who you have had an accident or develop a chronic illness? Are we willing to do any of these things? Because if we want to build a reputation, our company's over 200 people right now. We've grown 100 people in 5 years. It's crazy. And the difference, though, is that if we look at things and say, if we're not meeting the base needs of these employees, they're not going to be able to go back home and do things. We have an employee that has to work 2 jobs because we don't pay them enough. What do you think that does to that person? Do you think they're motivated to give you 110%? during the day. No, they got to
physically
save some of that
can't.
for the afternoon.
Yeah, they're going to be so burned out. So one of the first things they talk about is the highest turnover was their the minimum wage, where they actually paid the minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, which roughly averages around to $16,000 per year. In some states, it's only $15,000. I mean, that's unlivable. And so they had massive turnover in that area, and so they were trying to figure out how do we get to the point where our employees had to apologetically ask for financial support, just so they could, afford their homes. And what they did was they essentially had some brainstorming, and this is obviously the people at the top that are trying to figure these things out. And so when they hire new employees, they asked that they inject their heart into every interaction just beyond completing a task. And because we thought this is what every patient deserves, it's not always what they deserve or what they receive from the system. Because just before that, they said almost no one enters the infuriating and complex or complicated healthcare system by choice. And you think about it, like, people don't go into have a surgery if you don't need to. Like, it's something that you have to deal with. And so what they came back with in the end is what the gentleman who wrote this article came with a challenge. If we froze the wages of the senior team and invested the annual inflation adjustment allotted for us, the people at the top, into raising wages for the lower level employees. So the top 20 people who were in the senior team, their wages were inflated because at those positions, I and you would probably agree that a lot of times, and especially in healthcare, those are egregious wages. And so they froze their wages, and all of the inflationary adjustments were given to the 500 employees below them. And this is a pretty big challenge, because this guy said his goal was to raise the base rate to $15 an hour for the employees, which would essentially bring them up to that $30,000 threshold, which is still below by $17,000 below the median income in a country. So it's still pretty low, but you're no longer under that $20,000 a year poverty mark that they have. So this is a major change for these people, doubling their yearly income, and of course the results were pretty positive. I mean, this is going to be something that people are going to want to work for you. They're going to be in much better standing in health and motivation. So this is what interested me about this, is that you're essentially betting that the investment in your people will pay out. And capitalism in itself doesn't typically have that altruistic message that investing in the people, the little guy, it's going to be good for you in your long run. Like, in the end, what they usually say is that we need to cut costs and increase profits. And so, like, sometimes that equation doesn't quite look like they teach you in economics classes, and this is a good example of that.
Yeah, and essentially, they decided they couldn't just raise costs and cut costs, or raise prices and cut costs. That wasn't working for them, so they cut out senior executive salary increases, and took that amount of money and said, okay, how do we put it towards somebody else? And the return on their investment is huge. And that's the big thing here. This is like
business has tripled in 5 years. Yeah. They've been doing this for 5 years. They tripled, and they've actually increased their minimum wage to $16.50. So they're above that $15 minimum goal that they had set.
Yep. And a lot of companies are going to go, well, we can't do this. We can't afford that. And I don't disagree that there needs to be a bigger discussion around this, but I think there should be a starting point, A, and B, if this is starting to work, why are we not seeing funds go towards essentially making sure that we do a scientific analysis around this? That can happen. There's enough data out there. We can start petitioning that. And if the science dictates this and talks about it, and you can get this into a business class, what will happen is within 10 to 15 years, you'll see that shift. And it's kind of funny, like one of the arguments that we always hear, Anna, one of the big arguments is that, well, why would I pay somebody, McDonald's worker, more than an ambulance worker? And in the long run, we shouldn't be doing that. But the difference is, if we start forcing this hand, they're going to pay ambulance workers more. And it doesn't mean our costs are going to go up, because here's a prime example where an organization didn't raise costs to outside vendors to cover this. They cut the top executive salaries and covered it, right? And
they moved wealth from
Yeah.
the top, from a concentration at the top, and they redistributed it down towards the bottom. This is an actual example of trickle down, a real example of trickle down. But this was not something that is very common. Like if this kind of case happened, then you could believe that trickle down economics works, because this is an actual application of the theory. The thing is that the theory is rarely ever applied to anything of real scale. Like this is nice. This is a nice story. 500 employees, 20 executives. But I mean, if you did this to something with 10,000 employees, let's say Amazon, the new experiment that they've been doing, where they've been minimum wage at $15 an hour for their workers, we'll see if this does anything. I mean, that's a large scale application of this, and so that'll be a good experiment, and that'll be some good data as to whether or not that makes a difference. Because I mean, I think it will. I think it'll really help something. There's antitrust and monopolistic problems with a company being as big as Amazon is, but I do think overall it'll be a good thing to see if it can be done on a large scale. And if it just ruins Amazon's profits, then we'll know, yep, sorry, we can't pay people, we're all screwed.
Well, I don't know. It's I think it's a goal that companies should be worked towards. And it's kind of funny. I sent your article to our HR lady because she runs a small group that
That's
works
cool.
on employee enhancement type things. And, I said, hey, food for thought. We can talk next week if you're interested, but we'll see. You never know. I don't know. This week's been kind of interesting though, man. I've done a lot of reading, in between my Star Wars Destiny games, right? But I've been doing a lot of reading, and I came across this article that I really wanted to bring to your attention because I was like, holy crap, I can't actually believe I'm reading this, right?
I haven't heard anything about this. I'm just for the first time looking at it right now. So what the heck is this?
Scientists have discovered a new way for volcanoes to form, right? And
Wow.
I was like, okay, I mean, and again, this is not like some big revolutionary news, right? But to some extent, I find this extremely interesting. It was just published in Nature, one of the online publication networks, right? And I thought this was really good because they actually talk about different portions and think about it. When we were kids, right? At least when I was a kid, the core is where hell is. That's where all the magma is. That's where you're going. You don't want to live with the magma. And here they found a new way for volcanoes to form. And when I'll talk to my kids about this, and I guarantee you, my daughters will be like, "Oh, that's really interesting." Volcanoes are kind of cool as long as they stay away from me, and stuff like that. But
I think the same thing about tornadoes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, tornadoes are interesting, but nowhere near. Thank you. So we've long known that volcanoes form when tectonic plates converge, right? And essentially the mantle pummels it, and the core of it rises up, past out of the earth, and it's very obviously very warm, right? But they're finding that material from the mantle's transition zone beneath the earth can cause volcanoes to form in a completely different way, right? And that's just kind of crazy because we always have one idea of how do volcanoes normally form. This is exactly how it happens. I mean, remember the science fair project? Did you ever have to make a volcano?
No, but I know everybody did the volcano baking soda peroxide thing.
Yeah. And that's when science fairs were popular. My kids don't do them now, I guess.
Well, because I think one of the things people want you to do an actual science experiment over a scientific showing. So instead of doing the volcano, explaining why carbon dioxide in essentially baking soda and vinegar react the way they do. I saw one that was is not so much why the solar system or how the solar system looks and what's in it, but why the solar system works based on gravity wells and stuff like that. Pushing kids to go a little bit beyond just displaying what we know and start thinking about the scientific method. So I think hopefully that's what I've seen, what I've personally seen, and I applaud that, because changing the way kids think, as opposed to just learning something and then regurgitating it, but like actually learning to understand how and why, and then doing an actual experiment and creating a lab report, like that stuff needs to be done early. And this is these are the kinds of things that are like a kid doing an experiment, understanding what's happening here, and then maybe doing some kind of like display. That's pretty cool to me.
Yeah. And so what they found is that the inside of this transition zone, which is not, just the plates moving, right? Now they're talking about, mantle, having friction in a different area. And some of this friction is caused by other minerals inside of those different zones, right? And these minerals are actually part of what's happening inside of that transition zone to create a new formation underneath the ocean, which is causing, a new type of volcano, essentially. It's the same volcano, I guess, but a new way that it formed,
Yeah, it says essentially what it sounds like is that we've known that volcanoes can form at tectonic plate convergences when the plates are rubbing, because that's a split. And if you work your way down far enough, you're going to start hitting the magma. And so what they're saying is that the in the mantle, the liquid rock portion of the Earth, is that apparently in that transition period between that and the crust, that there can be perturbances and there can be disturbances that are deep enough and wild enough that they can actually get the magma to push right up into the crust. Like, let's say there's two chemicals or two materials that react particularly violently, and they're just kind of floating around in sort of a larger mass. They react really hard with each other, and then they just create an upwelling or a push into the crust. And then you have these things like the island of Bermuda is a good example. They said in here 30 million years ago, a disturbance in the transition zone between the mantle and the crust is that created an upwelling of magma to rise to the surface, and then that formed into a dormant volcano under the Atlantic Ocean, forming Bermuda. Like, this is, it's an explanation as to how and why land can actually appear in places that are outside of tectonic activity zones, which I think is absolutely awesome. This is kind of the anti Lex Luthor in the original DC Superman, where you just had crystals from Krypton that he could throw in water and make Earth, which was like the most absurd thing I had ever seen in a movie. And then Superman carried it and threw it into space. Yeah, this is a better way to explain how things work in the real world and not on your television screen. And we should all give this a little bit more time and thought. So, like, I would love to see this broken down a little bit more clearly, so that people that are a little bit more lay understanding of this kind of topic can understand it, because this is cool, but it takes a minute. Like, you're going to need to spend a few minutes reading this and look up some words and terms, because this is even, I have a hard time thinking that I even really understand what's going on here, but it does seem to be that they're just pushing right up into the crust, which is pretty cool. If anyone knows a little bit more, can clarify and make it a little bit more clear for us, let us know, because this is something that we would love to, post a cool meme about or something.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to, talk about it a little bit is just because, well, we talk about, doing science all the time. And the reason I found this interesting was because I was able to have a conversation with my kids about how science changes and how we learn new things and we can expand our wealth of knowledge. Because what is one of the things people get attacked with all the time? People are like, climate change doesn't exist because, you're
because
wrong about
science.
this. Yeah, because
Liar.
science, shows this. And it's like, yeah, science kind of does show that, but at the exact same time, science shows this and this and this.
Way
and
more
it
times.
can change. And the idea behind that it can change should not be a scary thing. It's only scary if we all of a sudden learn gravity. We've been lied to about gravity, and it's really not gravity. We should be scared then. Then I can say, all right, let's be a little bit scared here. But
Yeah.
when we're talking about just a few
was
different
wrong
things
about something, that would freak me out.
Yeah, exactly. But a few things here and there where we adapt and change our opinions, that's good. That's what we want to do. So that's why I wanted to have that conversation, because I thought this was a good article, and it was something of pretty good interest for the crowd. Now, let's move on to a little bit more serious topic. And I hate saying his name because he just irritates me. I just can't stand his name.
Mm-hmm.
But number 45 and his tax returns and this whole, garbage thing. We need to get into some of this. And Bernie Sanders tweeted out a discussion about tax breaks. And we talked earlier, right, about what a company did and was able to do with their actual non-increase of executive salaries. Now we're talking about the tax breaks Trump has given, and basically how Ford is now laying off people and cutting wages, right? Because you would think if we bailed them out to some extent, and then we, allowed them to have all of this, tax break information, or I guess not information, allowed them to have actual tax breaks to help with their organization. Why are they laying people off in the first place? Because it seems very counterproductive that money came out of taxes to allow them to help screw the economy over. I don't know. This doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, in the end, what we're looking at is just the idea of what the tax plan was supposed to do was reinvigorate and expand and expound the economic growth, bring us up to 3, 4, 5, 6%. They were saying that all of this money that would be given to corporations would essentially be driven into investments and into salaries, into wages, and it just supercharge the economy. Well, the people who are kind of skeptical of that actual usage said, well, what is the restriction to keep companies from just giving it to CEOs and shareholders? Because that's what we think they're going to do with it. And so obviously it's been 2 years now, or actually about a year now. And we see what's been happening as far as stock buybacks and all those types of things. Bernie Sanders posted that Ford got nearly $750 million in tax breaks from the new tax plan. And it's paid its CEO $18 million for a single year of salary. And just recently announced Ford's laying off roughly 7,000 white collar jobs. So these are middle class jobs. This isn't, blue collar worker at the bottom of the pole. These are middle class salaried positions. These are engineers. These are, these are the people who went to college and have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, $100,000 in debt. These people are being laid off. I think it was 2,300 in the United States, but these are all employees of Ford that are going to be axed. And now the question is that if the company got $750 million in tax breaks, and they're paying their CEO exorbitant amounts, why are the middle class workers for the company absorbing this? Why are they not taking all of these people that are obviously incredibly important and useful for the company? Why are they not being given a boost into research plans, new projects, expansion into new markets, growth here and there? All of that money has to go somewhere. And in most cases, we're looking at stock buybacks, essentially reducing the number of stocks that are out there by a company buying its own stocks, strengthening its own stocks, and increasing the value of the stocks that people own in the companies, essentially taking all the money that's a tax break, a corporate tax rate, and directly turning that into income for a shareholder, as opposed to and then just continuing on with whatever the plan was. Whatever they had planned to do economically and market-wise, that's basically maintained and stayed the same and been driven by the same market factors with what the central bank does and what Asia and what China does, what the tariffs are doing. All of that kind of stuff is just status quo. It's just a huge stock or a huge tax incentive that was given to them, and they just kind of liquidated it and turned it into, money for the people at the top. And we're looking at an example here. Ford is unfortunately was doing quite well, and they this is bad publicity for them, but this is not an isolated case. A lot of companies are doing the same thing. AT&T said that the tax plan would grow 7,000 positions. They ended up cutting 23,000 people, I believe it was, after getting hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks. So this is, to me, another example of how the Republican tax plan is essentially not performing and doing what it was supposed to do. The trickle-down economics is like in the previous example from The Guardian that we talked about, where that company did the right thing and helped people. This is companies doing the wrong thing. And, we'll see if it changes what people do as far as their vote. But it's this to me is an example of why we should be changing the people who represent us in the government, because there's way too close of a tie to the people at the top and these big companies, and everybody's kind of filling each other's pockets. And the people who are making these votes, the middle class, they're losing 7,000 positions here. Like this, there has to be a cause and effect, and this may not be, particularly causal, but it's definitely potentially corroborating evidence here that may make everything a little bit more clear in the future.
Yeah. I mean, heck, look at what's the name of that company? What's the one in Indiana that made public news during?
Carrier.
What happened with Carrier?
They fired all those people.
And what's the other thing? They
still went to Mexico.
Yeah. What's the other thing that happened with them? They invested in automation jobs. They didn't invest in new, tech jobs. So look, we've seen. I mean, that's two failures, in my opinion, that could be allocated towards Trump and his cronies, I guess.
Well, this is just the Republican economic model for decades. This is an example of them finally getting a chance to put it in since Reagan did his. The same since Bush's tax breaks, same thing happened. Economic downturn. So I mean, this
last year I think they laid off
of a downturn, but
200 employees or something like that, and then I think they laid off like 300 or 400 more in the same year.
For who?
For Carrier.
Carrier had 5,000 jobs that were up, and as far as I know, all 5,000 of those, what they did with the plan that Trump had was that he saved some of them for a while, but it was a temporary save, and then now all of them are gone.
Yeah.
So like in the end, all he did was delay the inevitable, which is part of the problem when it comes to, trade deals and stuff like that. And some of the things that you and I have talked about where we didn't really like the TPP, but, I would prefer the TPP over a trade war, a tariff-riddled trade war. So like having trade deals, even just unilateral trade deals or bilateral trade deals, like between two countries, like those things can be good. The multilateral, so like what the TPP was, is good, but we also need to be able to control what specific partners are doing, like China was doing and stuff. So like having that kind of that conversation, that is a good thing to have, and maybe we could rein in some of the countries that are doing bad things and cheating a bit. But what we're doing now with the tax plan and what we're doing now with the tariff stuff, like all of these things, these are all very clear indicators of who's losing. And the people that are losing right now are farmers in the Midwest and industrialists in the Midwest.
Exactly.
Like, white collar workers are getting slammed in the Motor City right now. Where's Michigan to vote in 2020? I can't see them voting for the guy who potentially is taking 7,000 jobs from the Motor City or from Ford, anyways.
I hope not. But the funny thing is, though, is people will blindly vote party lines. But you look at it, and there was farmers are losing right now. But yet, we have all these people putting Republicans in Michigan State Senates and the House, and they're being backed by the Farm Bureau. For example. I don't know what he is, but somebody related to me won a House seat in Michigan.
Yeah.
And basically he did it because he's been a farmer forever. He has all these long-standing things. You know what he makes his money on? Not farming. He had a repair shop. That's what he made his money on because he was losing money farming. They still have the farm. They still have great produce. Don't get me wrong. Here, I'll do the Trump thing.
It's subsidized to keep it running, but it's not a...
It isn't. It's not as profitable as what it used to be, and he's backed by the Farm Bureau, insurance agency, right? He's backed by, I can't remember the name of the other one, but there's another farm organization, like a big one inside of Michigan that he's backed by, and you just sit here and you go, yeah. Not only were you hand selected, but you look at your appointedness, and we go, this is what's failing. When I go into the farmers market and I got to pay 4 times what I pay at Myers for local produce, that's wrong. And it's all because farmers aren't able to actually make a living doing this. If we want to fix that, we need to stop and focus on local agriculture and not importation. And we need to stifle some of these larger organizations and allow these smaller farms to grow. If you want to give a tax break to a farm, okay, I'm okay with that. As long as they're not producing billions of dollars that, outside of the U.S.
In the end, there's a weird issue with the agricultural thing on my end, is that we do need to pay more than we currently do. We need to pay more for good food. We need to make a social decision not to buy industrial or processed meat and vegetables. We need vegetables that have more than 4 nutrients in them when it comes to nitrogen, phosphorus, and some of the other, long story. I recommend everyone read The Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food from Michael Pollan. But either way, in the end, we do need to pay more for what we eat. We need to be smarter about what we choose to eat. We need to eat a little bit less, but we need to eat more dense and healthier foods from things like the farmers market. And there's a variety of things that are in that issue, because to do that is essentially considered a thing of luxury in our society. You need to be affluent to eat healthy. That's a problem. People should be able to make a living wage to where they can eat healthy, natural food, and they can eat stuff that's farm to table and food that is ethically grown and not pumped full of steroids and chemicals and all that kind of stuff. Like, that is a major thing, but I think it's not really like a regulation or a farming. It's more, people should be able to afford to live like that. And so there's issues there. And so this is a good example of how it's trickling into all kinds of different things. When you look at the industrial processes for, what we're doing with automotives. I mean, this is Ford we were talking about here. But if you work your way down through it, you can see how this directly affects people in the middle to lower class. But the heart of the country. People that are feeding us. I can't think of something that's really more important than keeping the country alive. And we treat them like trash. And we use them as a commodity, the people and their food. And so I would love to see any kind of tax breaks and things like that trickling down to the people. Subsidies for farmers to help them deal with countries that are cheating or whatever. In the U.S., it has also been guilty of cheating in the past. I mean, we destroyed the eco system in Hawaii or in Haiti by inflooding it with subsidized corn and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of nuances and layers to this. But as far as right now with the tax plan and what the current administration is doing, this is a clear example of a problem. But in no way is the United States, innocent of any of these other charges and stuff like that too. So there's a lot of stuff here.
And what would you propose we do to pay reparations for that? Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like we can't even talk about doing reparations in the United States for the people who we held in chattel slavery to build the country, let alone the Wilsonian and expansionist natures of things that we did in Central America and in the islands and some of the things that we did. But I mean, you could also talk about what the original explorers did to those countries, the Portuguese and the Spanish. So there's a whole bunch of essentially white conquistadors who worked their way through the Central and South Americans and African continents as I would say like a plague of locusts that we talk about, like countries wanting to come into the UN and the UN saying, no, we can't have you guys in here. You're too poor. It'd be too much of a drag on the UN. Well, why are they poor? Well, about 1,000 years ago, there were conquests and essentially destroyed their social structure and took all their resources and sent them into Europe. There are things that the Western hemisphere and the Western nations, by quote unquote, the whole world needs to take care of each other. And, the people that are affluent do need to take care of people who are essentially paying the price for our affluence. Like, there's a reason the United States is so affluent. We did a whole bunch of things and we took resources from places. I don't see us giving back to those places, and I don't think we paid what those resources were really worth. So like there's all kinds of stuff that globally there's an argument to be made, and then if you look just locally with what we do in this country to our own people, it's not very good. So I shudder to think of what it's like to be a poor person abroad, waiting for the United States to do the right thing. It's probably going to be a long wait.
Exactly. Well, the last segment that we have tonight comes from an article from The Nation talking about Donald Trump's tax maneuvers.
And kind of applying them to people like him, not specifically to him.
So Donald Trump and his class maneuvers, her tax maneuvers for the upper class.
Yeah, so billionaire maneuvers of money.
Yeah. I mean, and it kind of has the same thing we've been talking about all night, to some extent, is we're looking at, what should we be looking for? For example, Elizabeth Warren has a proposal to levy what's called a wealth tax against people. Bernie Sanders has called for, tax hikes and tax rate hikes on inheritances and salaries and different things like that. I mean, that's nothing new for him, in fairness.
No.
And if we look at his taxes, he paid his fair share of taxes, weirdly enough. Out of everybody in the world, like everybody wanted to criticize, look how much money he makes. He paid the highest rate of taxes for his income and didn't try and cheat it. Whereas here we have the Republicans trying to turn around and say, hey, let's create laws that allow us to get rid of whatever we need to be able to get rid of so we can keep our money,
Yeah, it's just don't tread on me, don't take my money, I don't have to do this. The ideas of some of the things that they believe were the cause of the fall of Rome, when the elites, I don't know what they were called, essentially refused, because Rome's tax policy was almost a voluntary system, and so people would just opt out more and more and more, feeling less and less allegiance, and essentially bankrupted the country. And once they had gotten big enough, they had to pay for wars abroad and all this kind of stuff. So like just killed it. So if you're looking at what the United States is doing, essentially we have wars and military abroad. We're scattered all over the country, all over the world. We spend more on defense than in the next 10 countries, blah, blah, blah. You've heard all of the rhetoric on that. But what we've been doing, and what we did last year, was we reduced the amount of money that we take in. We're essentially saying, listen, everybody, we're going to take in less money, but we are going to increase our budget next year. We're going to spend more money, and we're going to take in less money, and we're going to increase, the deficit and the debt, which is kind of contradictory to the idea of deficit hawks with the conservative fiscal conservatives. But regardless of that whole policy on that, is what we're seeing is that people are essentially doing all kinds of maneuvers and tricks and things that our incredibly complex tax system is allowing for to basically keep their tax amount down as low as humanly possible, which for the average middle class person, it sounds like a good idea, right? You take a couple percent off or whatever. We're taking a couple percent off of an income of billions or millions, hundreds of millions. Like, we're talking serious money. And so there's you could pay an accountant or a CFO, someone in your country, in your company, to that's their job. That is their sole job all year long, $100,000 a year, to take 0.1% off, and they'll save you more money than their entire salary. So like it's a net win if they find these things, these loopholes and all these tricks. And so like there's an industry of this, and this story is basically bringing it out, saying that the things that Trump did, the things that he does, and the things that we're trying to find out what he did to see how he cheated, because of course he did with what he does, because they all do. And so what we're trying to do is find out that information. And this article is kind of saying, well, he and all the people at his level, pay grade wise, and claimed value of a state, they all do the same thing.
Yeah, which is that's insane to me, right? I mean, I don't even understand how they can get away with that. How does anybody not look at this and go, you're cheating the system?
Because the regulators are also in the same income level. So like this is kind of like saying, like a good example is how the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they gave Boeing oversight to make sure that all the sensors and all the safety equipment was safe on the 737 Super 8 Max or 8 Max or whatever it was, because the FAA was the budget was low. They didn't have enough money to cover everything. And so Boeing has done such a great job for so long being a good company. They said, listen, you guys check your own stuff. You make sure that you're doing the right thing. And if something is a serious or really important sensor, let us know, and then we will double check on that to make sure. And so essentially you're letting the people who need to be regulated regulate themselves. And what happens there is usually people will cut corners. This is a little expensive. One sensor is fine. We don't need two sensors. So if that one sensor says something's wrong, it'll drive the nose of the plane into a mountain. Like this is a good example of the same kind of thing, is that there's only the people who are in charge of a lot of this stuff. They're appointed by people who are billionaires. They're lobbied by people who are billionaires. They're, when it comes to getting these kinds of positions or whatever, that the people who are doing the regulating, the people who are looking into all of this debt management and money swapping, they are people who are also of elusive financial stature. And what's the incentive for them, who are probably using the same techniques, to stop people who are in the public eye using those techniques?
Yeah. Another thing I found, very interesting is that the percentage of people being audited in the upper 1% has decreased, and the amount of people making $55,000 or less who claim EITC credits are getting higher amounts of audits, right? And so we go, hey, you guys can have an earned income, tax trial credit or whatever, right? And oh, by the way, we're going to now audit more of you. And the difference is, if they cheat, it's, let's just say, a couple $1,000s they cheated the government of. If a large fish cheats, they could cheat millions of dollars. I mean, look at Trump claiming this property is really only worth $10,000. I know it says $1 million on the deed, but it's really only worth $10,000 because of this, and this. Don't worry about it. You don't got to pay taxes. So when we look at the fraud level, and we look at Pareto's, a Pareto analysis of any of this, which is what any good business can do. And this is sometimes where I feel libertarians have a little bit of meat to, their discussion points, because here we are watching a government organization fail to audit people on the top end and look at people on the lower end. And then if we look at it just purely on the basis of a business, we would want to audit the people that have a higher probability of being able to cheat, even if it's more complex, because of the fact that there's a larger return on our investment for that audit than on the low income person. But nobody cares. It's insane to me.
What the article says here is that talking about the president, if he indeed improperly avoided paying IRS what he owes, that makes Trump pretty typical for his cohort. The more income people have, the larger the share of it they are likely to misreport to the IRS. This phenomenon is most acute for the richest 1%. Those who likely to accurately report their taxes, on the other hand, are the lowest income filers. One, I will say this is not a surprise to me. One, because it's a lot easier to just say I made $19,000 a year because I have everything in my life is tied just directly to my, $9 an hour paycheck. I have no investments. I have a car loan. It's really simple. And, having, if your estate is in 7 countries, 35 different properties, 14 different banks, whatever, it's really hard to do that. But just the fact that it's complex doesn't mean that you get the okay, it's hard, you don't have to work so hard, it's okay if you made a boo-boo. Like, that's not how this works. Like, if a little guy who makes $19,000 a year says that he got an incentive or some kind of deal or some way of getting his tax reduced by a couple of percent, and they audit that, like you said, let's say that the fine is $1,000 or something, $1,000 bill to someone could destroy them in a lot of cases. They talked about that there was a recent study in the Detroit Free Press that if something like 80%, 70% of Americans, if you gave them a $400 bill, they couldn't find the money to pay it. Just out of nowhere, just an emergency bill outside of their normal life paycheck, their food and their housing and everything. Like, if they just had an emergency $400 bill, they would not be able to cover that. That is an insane thing to me. That is the way people are living. And if the IRS comes in and says, "Listen, here's a $1,500 bill. You owe us. You screwed up. You made a mistake." But I went to, Bill Bob's tax thing, and they said they can maximize my return and whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of things where there could be issues. But we see, why would they even be looking at the little guy? Like, what is the total amount of money that you're going to get on that? If you take the overall, like, are you going to do 150, 250,000 per state of these poor people or middle income people who are just making small mistakes here and there? What's the fines that you've added all up? But if you look at the number of people that are evading taxes with billions of dollars, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, you're going to be seeing much more income and much more brought in to the state and to the federal government on the people who are skirting things using tax havens, stuff like that. So, like, people that are actively manipulating their estates to evade taxes, there is way more money there. But we've seen the IRS become relatively toothless when it comes to cracking down on tax evasion among the wealthy, thanks to a series of steep budget cuts over the last decade, it says here. The annual budget has fallen by $2 billion since 2010. Take money away from the people that are regulating, they can't do their job. They just can't. It's not going to happen. And so audits have subsequently fallen by 42% as staff resources have dwindled. And they've declined most precipitously for the rich. So audits at the top 1% fell from 8% to 2.5% in 2017. The amount of the IRS recouped from millionaires dropped by more than $3 billion over the last 8 years. So there's this $3 billion either of money that would have been owed or that was fined from millionaires or higher that the IRS used to bring in. $3 billion. And I can't imagine how many $30,000 income people would have to be fined to bring in that $3 billion. It's you know what I mean? Like, there's a math equation out there. I could get my calculator out, but let's just face it, it's a ridiculous number. And the people that are in the 1% that are doing this, there's way more money there that's being cheated upon. And I think the return on your investment is significantly higher if you fund the IRS to do its job. But I don't think that's going to happen with the current administration.
Probably not. That would be my wager.
That's kind of sad.
It is.
So that's why I thought this was an interesting article. So, like, I like The Nation. Some people, have a little bit different views on the magazine, but it's always had a real soft spot in my heart from basically holding Christopher Hitchens as a regular contributor, and a lot of things that you can see from his past are in it. And they do cover, things that swing both ways on there. But tax evasion problem. This is essentially the way they end it. Tax evasion problem. If it festers at the top of our income scale, not at the bottom, and yet the rich are outplaying the cop on the beat. And that's kind of what it is.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up tonight, we have our last segment, our quick save segment. We do this every week that we do a real episode. Some of these other pre-recorded ones we don't do, but we do them for every one of the episodes. So for tonight, my quick save is another science article. There was an article on space.com that talks about exactly what is going to happen with NASA in 2020. And I thought it was interesting because they want to send living things to deep space for the first time since 1972.
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy, right? They want to send living things. Now, I don't think they want
to kill it. They want to kill whatever's out there. That's essentially what they're doing here. Because, like, are they saying just like a returnable thing? Like, it'll come back?
No, I don't. They're not. They don't think this is going to come back. I don't think.
So what are they sending?
What are they sending? They are sending something called a cube stat. And on this they call it they call it a spacecraft called a Biosentinel, which is carrying yeast cells into orbit around the sun to help scientists better understand radiation beyond our planet's magnetic bubble, essentially, right?
Oh, cool.
And that was, so they're sending to some extent organisms, microscopic organisms outside of our atmosphere to see how they're going to last. Now, again, they're not saying they won't come back. They aren't saying they will come back, blah, blah, blah. You know, they obviously want this.
They ain't coming back.
But their goal
No
is
way.
to get you know, a year's worth of data, essentially, if they can,
Cool.
on the long-term effects of radiation on DNA and DNA repair, right? And this is new territory. This is something that they haven't, I don't think they've done this before.
Not that long, no. I know that they've got stuff they're growing plants and food on the ISS, but like I don't think they've been any test. I was like, so like the ISS is inside what you said, the magnetic bubble, which protects the astronauts from some of the really harsh solar rays and gamma rays and stuff that can, you know, go right through anything and everything. I mean, you've seen the Fantastic Four. You know what happened with the gamma rays. They got the stretchies and the invisibilities and the fires, and I can't remember what the other one was. The hard rock body thing. Yeah. So like, but in the end, what they're worried about is that if you're just essentially in a spaceship, can we make a spaceship that's perfect? That'll keep you completely and totally safe as a living organism. So they're going to shoot something out around the sun, and so once it leaves the planet's magnetic protection, then we'll see what happens to living stuff, and we'll actually have sensors measuring it the whole time. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I thought it was very interesting, and I was kind of excited to see something like this happen.
Are you going to Mars? Are you going to sign up?
I don't know. Do they have Star Wars Destiny on Mars? Is there enough people to play? And is there going to be whiskey on Mars? If there's not,
No.
I'm probably not going to leave.
You'll have to eat poop potatoes. That's the Matt Damon future on Mars. That's what I know, and that's what I'm sticking to. No, anyways, no, I don't know. I don't think in my generation there'll be any people that jump on a ship and run onto Mars, but I do think that study would be really cool as far as learning about the effects, because they say that if, let's say, humans made it to another solar system, we're not entirely certain they would be humans when they got there, with all of the crazy things that would happen in a long time. And so my quick save is not so sciencey, but it's pretty humorous. Essentially, mine is time to bury grandma and then eat her nutrients.
Oh, that's weird.
I know. I like topics and clickbaity titles, and this is a good one. But that is my clickbaity title. The actual one is from the Seattle Times, and it's Washington becomes the first state to legalize human composting.
All right.
I thought that was stunningly and astoundingly amazing. And so essentially it brings to mind the movie Secret Window with Johnny Depp, where he kills people and he grows corn from them in the garden. Right out of the gate, I'm just thinking it's like the idea of liquid cremation is essentially a thing that happens where it's called alkaline hydrolysis, and it's an acceptable means of disposition for human bodies, and it's against the rules just about everywhere. But what it is essentially it takes your body, it breaks down everything, and allows them either to dispose and discard of anything that, you know, like bones or something that, as far as I know, I don't know if this process can actually destroy the bones in the system, but you get everything in a kind of a liquid of some kind when you are cremated, essentially. And so they can take your remains, they can take everything, and then use it in your in your garden or something. So the whole concept or prospect of this is that, you know, it's like the if you want to be cremated and then put into an urn that has a tree seed in it, and then that seed will grow, and then, you know, like the idea of, instead of taking up space in a cemetery or something with a stone and a vein marker of I was here, I lived, blah blah blah. This is an example where, you know, you, instead of doing the tree thing, where it's like you send out whatever, you get a tree bucket seed thing for your loved ones. This will just give you a bucket of what I imagine is the slime that comes out of when they stab the vampires in True Blood and they like burst, like a bucket of grandma, and then you can put it in the garden and grow lettuce and you'll have memories of her every time you have a nice Caesar.
Oh, that's no.
It's just whatever they're doing here for being able to compost your loved ones. This is it's a unique thing. To each their own. This is a regulation that it is. I mean, to me, is like the libertarian end of things would be like, why do you care what people do with that? Like, I can understand there's some kind of danger about like this is like you could get E. coli or spread some kind of weird disease, but like. It's not like you're just instead of going to a some kind of funeral home, you're just putting grandma in the backyard, bones and teeth and all. Like, that would be weird. This is obviously not that, but it's fun to pretend that it would be weird. So I just thought that would be a cool quick save, and I clicked on it and linked it and enjoyed it. So that's pretty much the end of mine for the episode here.
Yeah. Well, we've had an interesting journey tonight. I think the discussion on Trump's taxes, we haven't done that in a while. And, it's good to get back to the science segment. And then if you haven't enjoyed the last episodes, let us know. But we did a debate. It was a great episode. One of the Make America Great Again episodes that we've done before, And
sometimes you have to experiment in some weird stuff. And that was definitely an experiment in weird stuff.
Yep. And I'm going to call out Dallas, and I hope he listens to this after the fact. Originally, the reason we took the debate on it is because he had posed $300 to anybody that wanted to debate him. Not who won, just anybody who would debate him. So the idea is we wanted to take the money and, donate it to a good cause. And when he found somebody to debate with him, right, he has not, to this day, paid out more than $100. He has two other investors that has not paid their other $200. So Mikey, and I'll put a link in the description to his.
Wait, who is he going to pay? The charity or people?
Well, he was going to pay whoever he debated, and then Mike and I had a conversation about just donating it, and that unless he needs the money, let's just donate to a good cause. So Mike actually donated his own money to Planned Parenthood. He donated literally his own money and put it in investment, and people have matched his donations because he doesn't want to make it about him. The whole point of this is how can we help another organization out? So he's actually raised over $700 for Planned Parenthood just because somebody kind of reneged a little bit on the debate. So, hey, Mike, the debate's out there. It's been a week. Hopefully you pledge the rest of that money and give it back to Mike so he can donate it to Planned Parenthood. So
that's awesome.
Little bit of info there. So even if you listen to it and you're like, this wasn't my favorite debate,
tell us.
At least you can go help support Planned Parenthood in this time of crisis.
Especially right now. Holy crud.
Yeah. So we'll be back next week with another amazing episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have some new stuff coming up that we're excited to demo. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more fun things this summer. And if you are running around checking us out locally, we'll be volunteering with the local CFI on and off over the course of the summer, so you'll be able to catch us. So thank you all, and have an amazing night.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com. You've been listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today because we bring the discussion with the sources.